background of this message I'm about to give you is I started writing this in 2014. And I realized just recently why I started writing it because um, it was another year of spiritual turmoil in the church at the time for us specifically. And it was a way to stay focused during a time of spiritual turmoil. And it was I never finished it, never gave it. Part of the turmoil was bumping me down to 15-minute messages and not realizing what they're trying to do with that. So I sat on it all this time, thought I had finished it, and I realized I didn't. And so I finished it for this. And what's going to work out to is there's this part today. Next week will be part 2. And then I'm thinking about adding part 3. Part 3 would be the rewards of the kingdom and speaking about what God has promised us in the kingdom. Part 2 would be a test to see how this applies to your life. So, and right now I figure most people skip out now for next week. So, so if you ever say, "Oh yeah, there's not a test involved," well, here you go. Now we have a test involved. So keep that in mind when you're doing your notes and stuff. I mean, I won't. If you fail it, you can't fail it. But if you get bad mark, don't worry. It's not going to count against you. It's meant to strengthen the idea in your head and help you to move forward. So that works. That should work pretty good if all works out. Pray that I have the time to get it done because it seems like I hit the ground running when I got back from the feast, and it's been very busy for me since then. And I was able to work on this some more and get it going and plan out the next steps in that. So going forward, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus Christ was addressing the basic fundamental requirements to the Christian community and to seek a prize that awaits true believers in Him. How many people have read the Sermon on the Mount and understood what it was? I mean, it's basically a pillar of what we understand and believe, right? The second part is a little hard. Yeah. Now, basically, he described the life that Christians are supposed to live in the world around us and things to avoid and things to embrace. And one of the most remembered parts of the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 6, verse 33. Matthew 6:33. A little closer here. Yeah, that would be helpful. Matthew 6, verse 33. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things should be added to you. So you can think about that for a little. I know some of you are still turning there. I'll wait till you get to where you're supposed to be. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all the things shall be added to you. All these things should be added to you. Now, this was in response to asking the questions, or the people asking the questions about worrying and material cares of life, what we eat, drink, and what we're clothed with. Everybody in the world is always concerned at some point. Thank you for those things in life, and we all, even people in this room, people and true believers, they all tend to fall into that worry at some point in their lives. But reading Matthew 6:33 is clear that he did not want us to be concerned about those things, with material things or all those things that surrounded us every day. So the topic for today, if you'd like to write it down, is how does my way of life show that I'm seeking the kingdom of God first? How does my life show that I am seeking God's kingdom first? Now, this is something that is told for us to do. Seek first the kingdom. We need to seek it first in our lives. The world today around us, the world that we live in every day, it seems that we have distractions everywhere we look. It seems that even more so than years ago, we have many distractions. A lot of times we're sitting there and what are we typically doing on a day? This, right? We're on our phone. I actually see someone doing it right now. Sorry. Okay, well, that's excusable. That's excusable. But I mean, even at dinner tables, people are sitting around doing that. One meme out there, he says, the meme is the fathers tell them, don't look at your phones, and this is compared to 1970s. They see them looking at these big old phones with the receiver, and another one I saw was what people who die in this time period will look like 1,000 years from now, and there's this curled up skeleton with its phone. That it seems like we have these distractions, all these things around us. But the truth is, there's been distractions no matter what era, no matter what lifetime, no matter where you are. The distractions vary in intensity, they vary in what they are, but they've always been there. There's always been something. People put energies into pursuing money, possessions, pleasures, anything that money can buy, because they become eventually the distractions that lead to being idols. They put their main energies into furthering their careers or their other interests. I was watching one thing about there's a competition in the world's fastest shooters, and they basically have to go through this thing where they're shooting. It looks like a 22. They go from pistol to rifle to shotgun, and its accuracy is all judged. And there's a guy like literally behind them recording everything they're doing. And I'm thinking to myself, while it's impressive, what are they going to do with that skill? Nothing. Right? I mean, I love shooting, but what are you going to do with that skill? I mean, unless you're going against an entire army, which you have like a 0.1% chance of ever doing in your life, you're really not going to use it. But that's an example of how your interests can take away from things in your life. They become distractions. Your pleasures, all those interests become distractions. In the churches, we also have this problem where we have people that proclaim to be religious, but could put God in a secondary place behind what's more important in their lives. And honestly, I know I've been guilty of that, and I admit that I've been guilty of that. One of the quotes that came out in our pastors group was, "Who's more righteous?" It's kind of like an arbitrary question. Who's more righteous? The man sitting in the church thinking about fishing, or the man out fishing thinking about God? It's a kind of a paradoxical question. Who would be more righteous in that thing? So anything can take away from your focus, away from God and his kingdom. And honestly, in Satan's world, in the fallen world we have, it's all designed to do that. It's supposed to take you away from those things. It's supposed to take you away from the important things of life. And even in churches, it is a prevalent thing. I mean, the one guy was pointing out in this church, it's amazing how many people here claim to be religious, and you see them driving around in BMWs. Their houses have security systems on it, and it's like they're totally a different person when they leave this building. And it's actually universal across many churches. Now, to understand the problem, you have to have deep reflection, and you have to notice these things in your life. And you also have to make a commitment to change these things and pursue a kingdom oriented mindset. Understand that if you allow yourself to be choked by these things in life, it chokes out the kingdom in your life, and the kingdom focus, the place you're supposed to be looking towards all your life, and all these things. Everything has to be about this. Now, I showed you this earlier. And this is supposed to be more or less a book that, if you're in a speaking position in church or clergy or something, this is a must have for your library. And it was suggested I get one. I got one before the feast. And it's been extremely sobering reading this book. Fox wrote this in the 1500s, and people have added to it since. And there's men, women, children, all of them who are martyred for the faith. And it makes anything that I feel I can do look like a booger. I mean, honestly, it does. I mean, you can look at it later. It's a fascinating book. I mean, even some of the stories about women in there were very fascinating. So understand that this world is trying to take this away from you. These people in this book didn't let this happen, and they paid for it. But through it all, they had the right mindset. Understand it is good to be concerned over some material things in our lives. We need to have the income and the means to support us and our family. God ordained this in our lives from the Garden of Eden on, that we are supposed to provide for our families, and that is supposed to be something that we're supposed to do. Now, Ecclesiastes also talks about the fact that we're supposed to rejoice in our labor, and that is also godly too. We should be happy with those things, but know where they came from. I mean, everything you have is a gift from God. All your skills are a gift from God. Everything you're able to do is a gift from God. So you can rejoice. But he also adds in Ecclesiastes that these things are vanity and a chasing of the wind. So he tells you to put them in this place in your life, that they're great. God gave them to you, but remember, they're only in this life. And they're in the whole kingdom aspect, it's not going to matter in the end. So if a person is excessively concerned over materialistic things or goal oriented things or job, whatever, you have to understand that this has disastrous consequences, not only in this world, but in the next too. I was thinking on the way out here today, you have the example of Gog and Magog at the end of the millennium, where you have the uprising and people die. There's individuals who die in that. That's an example of how disastrous at the pinnacle it can be. That they're so focused away from God that they rebel against Him in a place where His authority exists and is present and noticed, and you can't ignore it. And they're still rebelling against Him, and they are destroyed one final time. That's the end result disaster of those things. You have to understand, even pursuing that kind of mentality in this world can lead to that. That you can distance yourself so far from God that you can't recognize Him when He's even in your presence. And it's a very big disaster. And it's just, I think in the future I'd like to do more on that too, because it really sets the mental, mindset you're supposed to have for those things going throughout your life, that you're always looking for something, and it's not in this world, and you're looking towards the person that provided it to you, and it becomes the most, and it should always become the most important thing you have. Now, I'm going to have you turn to 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7. You have to understand, all these things can be choked out. And even in the person who thinks they're the best at what they do and the closest Christian to doing things, there's times when you can be knocked right out of your faith in some ways. Oh, 1 Timothy 6, verse 7. We're going to read down through there. Now, Paul was writing Timothy here, and I don't know if you know Timothy's background, but he was eventually he became the first bishop of Ephesus. Now, it's kind of funny because the last message I gave for our former association was about Ephesus. But he was warning Timothy about the things that he's going to encounter in Ephesus. And at the time Timothy was there, there's a very prosperous community. There's a lot of distractions, a lot of things that take them away from things. And systematically, Christians were subject to that and falling away due to these physical distractions. And one of the things that Ephesus was noted for in Revelation was the fact that they left their first love. And you follow the physical Ephesus, and there was a continual downslide for hundreds of years. And eventually the city ceased to exist altogether. It's now a tourist attraction. But he was warning Timothy about the mindset that he is supposed to have, and says, "We brought nothing into this world, neither can we carry anything out. So having sustenance and covering, we shall be content with such things. Working to provide sustenance and covering for oneself and one family is proper." But Paul warned those who are determined to be rich fall into temptation and snare and many senseless, hurtful desires which plunge men into destruction and ruin. And that's the bottom line. I mean, I was watching something this week and I had to turn it off because just the subject matter was basically Will Smith and his wife talking about their divorce. And there was a moderator who's trying to explain what they're trying to talk about alongside there. And about 5 minutes in, I couldn't watch anymore because it was just pure selfishness on both sides of the coin and trying to avoid the obvious questions that someone cheated. And it was just the vulgar way they did this was just, see ya. It's just that, but that's again, they're two people goal oriented. They love their acting careers. A lot of them are very successful at it, and it went to their heads, and that's what I came away from. So it seems in the news that's all you have nowadays. You have this champion of worldly ideologies, worldly thinking. YouTube is full of them. TikTok is full of them. That it's funny because you see these Karen videos and you see these Karen doing these outlandish things. What you don't realize is a good chunk of those videos are fake. They're actually people acting things out. These situations never really happen. It's a way to make money. It's a way to, further themselves. And selfishness ends up being at the core of these things. And all worldly pursuits along this line are just pure selfishness. Satan, you have to understand, is also behind this. This is Satan's world right now. And you have to understand that he has an approach to this too. And this is how he snares people. At first, he will entice you in small ways. And some of that is the selfish desire to do things better. You may even say, well, yeah, I trust in God, but in case he doesn't answer my prayer, I'm going to do it my way anyway, and I'm going to start doing this. You don't include God through the whole process. You just say, I'm going to do it my way. That's a subtle snare because you're saying, well, I trust in God to a point, but I think I trust in myself better. So I'm going to do it this way. And then what happens is, as you're pursuing these things, it becomes a greater pressure and you have greater distractions and there's greater pull on you. And before you know it, you're way off base and you're swimming in open oceans in places you don't want to be. And some of these also can come in the workplace too. You can have a promotion or you can pursue a better job. But you have to ask yourself, and it's important because this question came up with something someone did at the feast, is that you have to ask yourself, how's this going to, and you have to ask this directly, how is this going to affect my spiritual life? How is this going to affect the time I spend in prayer, in meditation, reading my Bible, reading books like this? How's that going to affect those things? People have given up good paying positions because they're seeing the damage it was doing, even on a physical level, to their family. When we were in Bowling Green, Kentucky, we stopped at the Rail Museum. The guy that we were on a tour with was a guy who retired from the railroad. And he was saying, how impactful working for the railroad is on your home life. And it's just like, for us, they ask you, well, when's Christmas for you? And he said, well, maybe Thursday. It was just that arbitrary when you're dealing with that career. You worked whenever they told you to work. Needless to say, that's why I don't work for a railroad. I love the railroad, but that's why I never got a job there. Many times it has come my way. Many times I could have given up everything for it, but I didn't want to give up the more important things. That's just my story, and it's something that you have to keep in mind going forward. It doesn't matter how old you are or where you are in life. I mean, even retirees have gone through this where they pursued something. So the vast majority of the retirees I talk to, they end up going into a state of, well, I get meaning out of volunteering here, or I get meaning out of going to this country club, or I get meeting out playing golf with my buddies, and eventually this stuff crowds out the spiritual things. And so you have to be aware of these things and understand that we are sacrificing for godly gains when we give up those things and we orient ourselves spiritually. We end up worrying more when we put our security in things rather than God. God is providing you security through the way he describes how you should be. When you start deviating from that, that's when the worry and anxiety starts. When you learn to put your thoughts, your hearts, and everything into God, that's where the easing stuff. That's a promise he makes throughout the Bible. Focus on me. Focus on what I'm doing. Focus on what I'm telling you to live your life like. That's what he's trying to do. So I have to be on guard that the love of money, the love of things, all those things can choke out kingdom interests. And I'm still kind of putting it together, but I'm working on something that shows consequences of those things. Whenever you pursue something, the first thing you should ever look at, well, actually two things: how God would see it, and what are the consequences of it. Those are the two things you should always look at. And especially if, and it doesn't matter because temptation comes in a lot of ways. In sin, that's a very important thing. You have to always focus and put your mindset on what are the consequences of that sin. What is it going to do to me? Yep. That's it. And that's it. I mean, sometimes he'll allow you to have something and it is in his will for you to do those things. And so it's including him in the process is the most important thing you can do. Saying, okay, where do you want me to be with this? And that's one thing, like I said, bringing back the Bible sign prayers is answered prayers. I mean, once you start identifying that He answered these things, and this book, I'll do a shameless plug too. This book actually has some of that in there, how these people prayed for things and how God answered them afterwards. Some of them they were answered after He died. These people died, but it was interesting how they were answered, and they had a global effect. It was really interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, since you mentioned the topic of prayer, when we were, and I don't want you to forget where you are, but
Oh, you're
when
fine.
we were at the feast, they did a panel and they talked about one of the most great things to do with a congregation, which we should try to adopt, is doing a prayer division. Just praying for those things together, and then keeping track of that progress together. And we see, all right, we prayed for this, God answered. We came through on that. We fought that thing,
Yeah.
or prayed for that, whatever.
Well, the success of a church is based on prayer. It's based on a relationship with God, and so it's very essential. When a church tells you you're not allowed to pray because you're dressed funny, or they tell you that you're not allowed to be part of this, I'm going to tell you right now that's a false religion. All right, it's a false religion to do that. There is no one that should be between you and Christ. Bottom line, it's universal in all Christianity. If someone puts you between you and Christ, it's a false religion. And you can look it up, you can research it, you'll find that same conclusion. They're interfering with the fundamentals of something that's far greater than them, and they're putting themselves in a bad place. And we heard a lot of stories this feast about organizations and people putting themselves between people and Christ. That doesn't work. In the long term, they're going to have to answer for that, and they're going to pay for that kind of thing if they don't repent. So we have to be on guard with these things. Now, in verse 10 of 1 Timothy 6, he says, by reaching out for the love of money, some have been led astray from the faith and have stabbed themselves with many pains, or in some translations, it's many griefs. That's again, they've been led away from the faith and they end up following a life of pain and grief. Don't ever be fooled by what you see out there. You have to understand that. Don't ever be fooled with the success stories. Don't ever be fooled. You always have to ask, what did these people give up for this? Ask yourself that in your mind. What did they? You'll never hear that out of some people. But each and every one has given up something for the success they have. There are some people have been having a good marriage of both, but that's God's will too. We don't know what they're working in those situations or what he's working in those situations, but we know that there's something he wanted. A lot of times the increase that they get in the wealth that they get ends up going to supporting others. And I know for a fact many cases of that where they were made wealthy, but that support went to helping others. And that's probably the biggest reason why they have it. It can work, but God has to be at the forefront of these things. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 11 through 12, it says, flee these things and fight the fine fight of the faith. Many words there. So that's the call for us to do these things. You have to understand that earnest effort is needed to avoid being swept away from these materialistic pursuits in life. But we have to exert ourselves so that God will never forsake us by pursuing Him. I mean, if you keep working against Him, there's times He's going to pull away from you, and you have to understand that. There's times where He's going to let you, in Acts it's called giving them over to a debased mind. They're so far gone mentally that He gave them over to that mind. One of the things that we were talking about at the feast was Jacob and Esau. Not that Jacob, but Jacob and Esau in the Bible. And when you see Esau's story, yeah, he gave up his birthright. He is hated more than Jacob was. But you see his life, and he is wealthy. He is well to do, had lots of things. That's a distraction. And what it is he got all those blessings on this side of life. Jacob got some blessings and the ultimate blessing that carries on through eternity. Esau didn't get the same. It ended with this life, and it ended when he died. We don't know what he'll come back as. We don't know what God has done, but he showed in those passages, if you read between the lines, everything came in this life of Esau. Blessed, even Abel, same thing, or king, same thing. Everything. He was over 12 cities, if I recall correctly. Blessings only in this life. It's a sad thing because you'll be so distracted by these things in this life. And honestly, when you die, who is the first thing you're going to see? Christ. And it becomes a whole new, different world in every aspect. And everything that was here dies here. So you have to keep that in mind. So you have to understand that even through all this, regardless of the high prices we're experiencing, I think we're in 20% inflation right now, the high unemployment, which should ramp up in the next few months. God will take care of you through these things, and He always does. You have to put your faith in Him. Years ago, we had a story of a fellow in Africa who was without a job. His final solution was to fast for until God gave him one. He fasted for 9 days. And finally, God literally dumped one right in his lap. So it was, I mean, I don't recommend doing it, but if it takes that, you don't know. And that's, I've seen other people just sit down and they prayed without ceasing for hours a day for things. And then finally, God answered them in short time. So a connection with God is the ultimate thing. It really is. Hebrews 13 and verse 5, if you'd like to turn there. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. Now, Hebrews is most people, well, I don't know if people are aware of this, but it's interesting that he uses Hebrews. Paul uses Hebrews to identify him talking to his former people. Well, he's still a Jew, but the Hebrews were the Jews, but he uses the old term instead of Jews as far as his letter to them, which he's addressing their ancestral roots and trying to bring them back to that ancestral roots. In Hebrews 13, verse 5, he says, "Let your manner be free of the love of money, while you are content with the present things, for God has said, I will no means or by no means leave you or by means forsake you." And you find that throughout the Bible. I will never leave you, I will never forsake you. So that we may be of good courage to say, He is my helper, and I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? And that's the ultimate rallying cry in these things. No matter what your situation is, you trust in God to the point where you can say, "Oh, God's going to take care of me." But you also know that He'll instruct you He's going to take care of you. Sometimes it's going after this, going after that, but He's guiding you to those things. Like one time I was clipping out job listings, and my MO was to take the paper, clip them out, and then I'd follow up on them. And I'm sitting in my car and I'm doing this, and I'm clipping these things out. And one slipped down into the vent, and I'm just sitting there like, should I go after that one? I mean, I'm so tired. I've been looking for work for over 9 months now, and it's really so. I got a set of tweezers out, and I reached down in there and got it. And it ended up leading, that one was the only one out of that whole stack that had a response. And I ended up working for the town for 3.5 years from that little clipping. So you don't know how these things work, but they do work. Something prompts you to say, hey, you better fish that out of there. So that's my story. So this is the reason why we're not supposed to be concerned. One of the reasons we're not supposed to be concerned with the things around us is God is in control and He does provide. And He will give us the things that we need to. And that also includes this group here, this church. I mean, it's amazing, how we've come in 10 months or so we've been together, and how it's blessed people. And I don't think it's cursed anyone. I certainly hope not. But, but I mean, maybe at the other end it did. I don't know. But it's just it's amazing how far that we've come. And I think a lot of us had to do some reflecting in that too. And I see even at the feast talking with people that a lot of these situations that they went through similar to this have led to reflections in their life and where they're headed. And if not all of them have come to the same conclusion that God's with them and He's steering them somewhere else. And He wanted them basically out of where they were. And it's a powerful thing for God to take you out of one place and move you to another place. And it happens to a lot of people. Again, this book here talks about those things for other people. So, it's a very fascinating thing. So we have to see if God is pulling us away from these things, and or He's drawing us to these things, and what they mean to our spiritual development. God doesn't want you away from Him. You have to understand that. God does not want you away from Him. He'll give you every opportunity to come back. And you just have to remember that too. So how we conduct our lives in this world shows how we are seeking the kingdom. All these things do. Luke 12, verse 31. Luke 12, verse 31. I want to put this one in there because it also shows that we still have responsibilities. And sometimes we tend to overlook that, or we tend to focus beyond those to things we shouldn't. And it's a simple reminder of what we already talked about. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. Oh, did we put that in there? Oh, you can turn there, but basically I'll summarize it. That warns us not to seek what others do, or that seeking the kingdom, and because it's God's pleasure to give it to us. And that's the bottom line. He wants to give us the kingdom. He knows what he's got for us. He knows where we're going for these things. He knows that this is eternity. You sometimes late in life you get down about things you didn't get to do in your life. You get down about, I didn't learn this skill, I didn't learn how to do this, and I wish I would have learned how to do that. And in eternity, you're gonna learn all you can do because you can live forever, right? You can learn how to sing, you can learn how to do whatever, essentially whatever you want, because you have basically nothing stopping you at that point. And you have to understand and embrace that. Eternity is just that, forever. That's the kingdom he's trying to steer you to, not what dies in this world. I mean, in the past, I illustrate that by taking a giant phone book, and Buffalo has a giant phone book. I think New York City has 3 or 4 of these same giant phone books. And when you look at eternity, you can liken it to, this is 7,000 years of man's history. This is the rest of the story that goes on and on and on and on in volumes and volumes. That's what God's trying to steer us to. But what I was trying to say is 1 Timothy 5, verse 8 reiterates the fact that you're supposed to take care of your family and relatives, because he says right out in 1 Timothy 5, verse 8, that the one who does not do that denies the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's scathing stuff. He's calling you worse than an unbeliever if you don't take care of your family and your household. So it is imperative that you do those things. And that's mostly geared towards you young folks, that you take care of these things, because that's what you're supposed to do. So God provides based on needs more than wants. And he provides for your family as a whole. And it's concluded in that unit of who you are. He does allow for added blessings, and he sees fit to give you those added blessings. And I will admit from personal experience that sometimes blessings are a test. They test you to see how you're going to react. So keep that in mind too. One of the added blessings that we can say for people like me is being able to work and do this, because you see that there's a blessing in doing both. And then the pastors group I'm a part of, a good chunk of those guys are the same way. They have full-time jobs and they do an amazing work on the side. That's a blessing. That's a huge blessing. It also comes with tests too. I mean, the one fella, he was on there yesterday. He's a full-time truck driver and the preacher, and his church is about our size, which I found encouraging. But he goes, yeah, I have a Sunday service, I have a Wednesday service, and I have a Friday service. And I'm thinking about cutting one of those out. And we're like, yes, by all means, God will understand. But he's like, I'm on the road all day, and then I get in my car and drive an hour to the church, and it's like, yeah, I think you need to take a step back there. You're doing a fine job. But that's how he does it. So I'm, again, I feel like this high when I hear things like that. But anyway, it's pretty cool that he does that. So he wants you to take care of family, and he does provide blessings above and beyond that. And I know some of us in this room have been blessed above and beyond what we have, and that's a great thing. But also understand again that it comes as a test to see where we're going with these things. I mean, they can be used for wise things, or they can be used to take you away. So when you're firmly planted in the kingdom focus, you're going to do good with whatever you're given. That's just is a bonus to that whole mindset. No matter what God gives you, you're going to do good with it, even when you're tempted with those things. In the parable of the sower, Matthew 13:23, he says those things. And it's a good ground to be on. You see that people were put on bad soil, rocky soil, and rocky people were taken away by the cares of this life. But then he goes into the good soil, and he says in 23, but the seeds fall on good soil is referring to someone who hears the word and understands it and produces a good crop, yielding 160, 30 times what was sown. And that's how blessings like that work, those added blessings. And when you're in a firm kingdom mindset, even physical blessings can work that way. And you have to understand that. So you have to have that firm basis. I mean, if you're on a rocky soil, you're going to want to pursue things out of life. You're going to want, as soon as something good comes your way, you're like, see you later, suckers, and you're gone. It's just that's the type of mindset it goes. We've seen that. We've seen that with people. Or you think they're all through, they're doing well, they're becoming faithful, and something wonderful happens to them, and then they're out the door, and you never hear from them again. And you're just like, what are they up to now? And you find out they've gone totally into a secular orientation with their life. So one of the things that we have to look to is also serving your church. That's a blessing too, to be able to serve your church. And that's what I loved about the CFN site is they were very much encouraging serving your church and and they tried to shoehorn all the special music in that they could. So it was kind of cool. It's like, song service, like half an hour of people singing and stuff. And I just thought that was really, they worked really hard to get everybody in. That's good. Preaching, like Jordan said, that's also a good thing. And you can learn from anybody if you put your mind to it. If it's biblically sound, you can learn from anybody, even me. So you have to understand that it is a blessing to even want to do that, let alone do it. And God calls it a good thing when you do it. Now, one of the things about distractions that comes up in the Bible, and you have to understand it's actually a reoccurring theme throughout the Bible, is material distractions are seen throughout it. And he says, always come back to me, always come back to the kingdom mindset. But it's interesting that one of the places we see it is Job, where Satan says, if you take all these things away from him, he's going to curse you to your face. But the problem was is that he took all the things away from him. Job, what did he do? He complained to God. But you have to understand, you read between the lines. He could have run away and said, I'm never going to serve you again. He even brought his complaints to God. So he still had God in the forefront of his mind. He still was kingdom oriented. Are you allowed to complain to God? Absolutely you are. He wants to hear from you. Understand that he allows for that too. So just an example there. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself anyway here. Philippians 2 and verse 19. I'm trying to keep this, where I don't go 2 hours. So it's just like, Philippians 2 and verse 19. Yeah. And we'll get back to Job later because I got a little bit ahead of myself here. One of the things that about being kingdom minded is other people will see that, and mentors will see that, and people above you will see that. And in Philippians 2:19, you see Paul vouching for Timothy's character, and I thought that was really fascinating to the point where I included it. And he mentioned something in the beginning, which is again materialism, and he says in verse 21, he's going through and saying, hey, this is Timothy, this is the person I have. In verse 21, he says, for all seek their own, they do not seek the things which are Christ. So he's showing that, okay, most people are selfish, that most people follow their desires, but know that proof of him, that the Son with the Father, which is he's liking Timothy to his son, he has served me with the gospel. So he's vouching for the fact that Timothy had a kingdom mindset. He was oriented towards the right things. One of the things you see with a lot of speakers, and it's funny because you hear other people who train speakers and says the vast majority of them are serving themselves. But here he is vouching for someone that is actually seeking the right things. So it's a good thing there. Keep in mind too, on the other side of the coin is that serving also is dictated by our physical abilities and well-being. We're only able to do what God allows us to do. And some people are better at some things than other things. Some people don't have the physical stamina to do certain things. Some people, don't have the capabilities or God is steering literally a different direction than some things. And those physical and mental things are part of what he gives us to do these things, and that he'll allow us to serve in different ways. In this church, the nice thing is it seemed like everybody kind of fell into roles automatically. And I think that it was a big sign that God is blessing these things. So keep that in mind too. Um, that you and don't never get critical of those who can't come up with things or can't do things. It's very imperative as a group and as a church not to condemn people when you think they should do something and they're not doing it. You have to be on guard with those things. And it's something that we have to always keep in the forefront when we think about each other and what we're doing. This is all still new. So we're going to have potholes. We're going to have times of trials. We're going to have testing of relationships. We'll have all that going forward. And we have some of that even here before, but it's just, again, kingdom mindset. You guys keep focused on the right goals. And unity is one of those right goals. Galatians 6 verse 4 kind of talks about that. And just I hate to keep saying this, but the CFN site, one thing I love I'll hate saying it, I should say it. The one thing I liked about the CFN site that I saw missing that I saw in Kagwa, I'll mention them, is a lack of competition. That's an incredible thing because in the false religion, you're encouraged to compete for the prize. That's not Christian either. There's no competition in that. God blesses you according to what you're going to do. There should never be a competition for those things or affection from those above you. I didn't see that at the CFN. Yeah.
I wanted to add when you're talking about Timothy, even this comment, if you think about Timothy and who's being commended for not like having self-interest or like if you go unjust gain, greediness.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, that was one of a big contention that Christ had with the Pharisees because why?
Yep.
They were in the presence of the Pharisees. There was always a little sidebars. Oh yeah, and because why? Because the Pharisees they were lovers of money. They wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Basically their interest was not aligned with the kingdom.
Yeah.
They were aligned with how do they use their position to enrich themselves.
Exactly. And he's trying to steer him away from
he's
it.
trying to tell Timothy basically don't be like the religious leaders of their day.
Yep.
In a way, I mean, maybe not directly, but it's the same thing. You can see like that already played out. Christ basically said, "Don't do that."
Even in his disciples, he saw the competition there. Peter and John. John he was a bit of a narcissist because he kept saying he's the one that Jesus loved. It's like he loved me more than you. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's it. So you see this narcissist behavior.
And what did Jesus say? He said, if you want to be great, you have to be people's servants. And if you want to be the greatest, you
Yep.
have to be their slaves.
Yep.
So start thinking in upside down way.
Yep. And that's again the rewards of the kingdom. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And and obviously reading the Bible, you know that's the call to ministry is to serve. The stronger is supposed to serve the weaker. And so when you have the stronger suppressing the weaker, it's a false religion. And you have to understand that. I mean, honestly, we could talk about these subjects for decades. I used to tell our Bible study group, it goes, at the present rate we're getting through the Bible, we'll be done with it in about 150 years. So you can't go anywhere. And I think even as a church, it's more like 250 years before we get through all of it. And so don't die off anytime soon because we got a lot to go through. Galatians 6 verse 4. Galatians 6 verse 4. I like this scripture for a lot of reasons, and it really points the way home. Galatians 6 verse 4 says each one should test their own actions, then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with their instructor, which means you're supposed to show what you've learned and say, hey, this is what I learned. This is how I'm developing. This is how I'm going. And that instructor also and very much includes Christ, includes God, includes anyone who put that, the right things in your head. But I like the fact that it addresses comparison very much because in former associations they encourage comparison. They encouraged competition. I didn't see that at the feast. I liked what I saw at the feast because you always, even if you didn't do nothing, you felt you had a purpose there. And that's a very valuable thing to encourage. So, again, why is there a relation to seeking the kingdom and material well being and possessions? Why is there a reoccurring thing in the Bible about that? It is reoccurring, even from Cain and Abel. It is a reoccurring thing because God knows that this world will try, and Satan, the God of this world, will try to anchor you to these things. And it is a very big problem that we face as Christians. Again, I got ahead of myself. We were talking about Job, and the scripture used here was Job 1, verse 9 through 11. And that's what Satan did, is he said, yeah, you take all this stuff away from him, and he's going to curse you to his face. And we could turn there if you want. Job 1, verses 9 through 11. And again, early on we had a teen and young adult study about Job too, where it discussed it in detail. I don't know if anyone remembers these things, but, but I'll just put that out there. We can go back and learn about Job too, because it's a very fascinating story when you dig deep into it. But Job 1, verses 9 through 11 said, so Satan answered the Lord. Remember that Satan still had to present himself among the angels to the Lord. And he says, consider my servant Job. He's wise and righteous and all that stuff. And then Satan said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, around all that he has from every side? If you have blessed the work of his hands, and the possessions have increased in the land, but now stretch out your hand and touch all he has, and he surely will curse you to your face. See, if you're not on strong ground, you're likely going to be doing that. God takes something away from you, you're going to be like, why? Why did you do this? I mean, you're going to ask that question anyway. But if you're seeking him from the heart, it's going to orient you back the right way. But if you're seeking in a rebellious sort of way, like I'm just dropping everything and going away from you, and I don't want to ever speak to you again, that's not kingdom mindset. That's not where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to always be kingdom oriented. And of course, oh yeah.
And Satan is really accusing God of not being lovable. He's just
Yep.
buying his affection, right?
Yep.
Like you're just giving him things, and that's why he's righteous before you. So if you stop doing that, there's nothing there in the relationship. But
yeah, and that's it. He's showing hers more.
Yep. But Job actually, I mean, did say this isn't fair, which it wasn't, but he never did walk away from him, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. When he complained back to God.
Yeah.
He still came back. He's like, God, why? Why did you do these things? And that's appropriate. You have to understand it. Even in prayer, it may seem like it's not, but God allows for that. If you have a complaint, bring it to him. He doesn't want you to bring it to the guy down the street or someone that wouldn't care less about, or a shrink or whatever. He wants you to bring it to him. Talk to him. He wants that relationship with you no matter what. And that's what Job did. He did that exact same thing. He brought right to God, saying, why is this? And as we analyzed this in the teen young adult study, we went to the backgrounds of his friends and show where they came from. And you learn very quickly through the hidden, what's not said in the scripture, but is implied, is that Satan didn't get these ideas himself. He got it by learning what his friends were saying about him. Because when they're doing their testimonies, that came out that, hey, Satan got this from them. So, he took what they were saying against him and used it. That he got all these things through, and God would take these away, he'd lose it all. So.
I don't want to go too far down the side trail, but Job is really fascinating in that he said, really, this isn't fair.
Yep.
I don't deserve it. And God came back and he didn't say, yes, you're right. He said, you have got to trust me.
Yep.
Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, right?
Yep.
And in all that, he's saying, you have got to just trust that I know what I'm doing, right?
Yep.
And that's so meaningful for everyone because we don't know what he's doing.
Yeah, be still and know that I am God.
I mean, he might give us riches because he's got something for us. He might take away things because he's got something for us, but we have to let him lead.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
And so you have to keep that in mind too. That's kingdom oriented, keeping your mind on the kingdom. And you have to understand that, in that example too, that these things, all these things. He did things like, make additional sacrifices for his children. It was on the surface, it would look like all these things were becoming his idols, but it brought out the fact that even despite having all these blessings, they weren't. And so you have to understand that anything can become your idol. Anything that takes away from God becomes your idol. And even a church can be your idol too. You have to be very concerned about those things. So we have to keep that in regards to material possessions and things that can captivate our hearts and lure us away from these things. And that could include lifestyles. Even our family can take us away if we're not careful. We get too oriented in family activities. We get too distracted by family as well. It's fine. And there will be times that come up like that. One of the things on Focus on a Family a while back was someone having to deal with that with a foster child that they had, where this person was extremely needy, and oftentimes when they felt neglected, they'd attempt suicide. And at one point, this kid was in the hospital from attempted suicide, and they're supposed to go off. They wrote books and they did tours and for these books and stuff, and they're religious-based books. And the couple sat down and they said, "We can't let you do this to us." They prayed over him in this hospital bed and they went, because this is control and this is not what God wants. So they left it in his hands and walked out. And was that appropriate? Absolutely it was, because he had a track record of trying to control them through his actions. And that's how even family can take us away from a kingdom mindset. And you have to keep those in the right things too. Colossians 2 and verse 20. There's another signature verse in keeping kingdom minded. And it's like what Mr. Manning was saying there about the Pharisees. That was the culture. That was in Colossians kind of addresses this culture too. Is putting other things and ordinances and things in place between God and you, and willfully doing that. But in this, it kind of shows it from the false religion side. And it says in Colossians 2 verse 20. Wherefore, if you be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, as living in the world are subject to ordinances, touch not, taste not, and handle not, for which all perish in the using, which means they're all going away, after commandments and doctrines of men, which, excuse me, which these things have indeed show of wisdom and will and worship and humility and neglecting of the body, but do not honor to satisfy the flesh. What he's addressing is these things are, you're following doctrines, you're following rules, you're following these things, and you think you're gaining righteousness through these things. But in the end, they don't satisfy the flesh. They're not the things. The kingdom mindedness satisfies the flesh because you're putting everything where you are. And he's addressing those things that don't. And that includes ritualistic things, false religions, all that stuff. And this was definitely an address to dealing with putting religion between you and God. In fact, my brother posted something about that this week on his site, that these things are also materialistic. You can get focused so much on routine, so focused so much on observances that you lose sight of what God is trying to do. And the Pharisees, again, the Jews, they take that distraction to a whole new level, where they get into the ritual side of things. They became very materialistic. And they became, it was that they take the dust off their heads, and I think one scripture, if I recall, they're trying to save the dust from their heads. They're consuming widows' houses, all those things that Christ talked about in regards to the mindset that they had. But they're a religion unto themselves, and they try to control things from that level of materialism. Now, again, materialism and physical rules outside of Christ is a false religion, and we have to be mindful of those things. They do not produce godliness, and they do not honor the sacrifice that Christ did for us in those things. One of the things is, as we get into closing, is Hebrews 11 and verse 12. And as we know from experience, most of us anyway, is Hebrews is the faith chapter, and it's very much details those like this book here, that those who died in the faith and what their orientation was. And those who know the story of Abraham know that he was a well-to-do man. He always was a well-to-do man. Even in his going through the desert, he wasn't just Abraham and Sarah and a few servants. It was a whole city full of people following him around because
Yeah, but his family army of 300.
yeah, and that's just his army. That doesn't include servants and people following him, and that's because he drew people in. I mean, he was an example in that for a time frame when that mattered. But in Hebrews 11, verse 12, it says, "And so from one man, as he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky and as countless as the sands of the seashore," showing that the lineage that came from Abraham was multiplied as God had promised. All these people died in faith, having not received the things that they were promised. However, they saw them and welcomed them from afar off. And they acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth, which showed that they lived beyond what they were physically here on earth, and they focused on something that was to come. In verse 14, it says, "Now those who say such things show that they are seeking a country," and then this translation goes, it says, usually will end at country, but says a country of their own, which means all these times, all these things are always focused on what lies beyond, not what lies at the physical. And the faith chapter in Hebrews talks about these people. And this book talks about these people. And their examples are very sobering, that they put themselves so oriented towards the kingdom that they pushed everything else out. One guy on here prayed so hard all the time on his knees that he couldn't physically get up, and they had to have people pick him up because he was on his knees for hours at a time. That's kingdom minded. I mean, I don't, it's not required to do those things, so don't worry. But it shows how dedicated people were and how even the ordinances that they fought against in their day, they said, "I'm just staying here. God's oriented me this way. I'm staying here." There's even examples of women who did this, who died horrible deaths because they stood they stood on the premise of what was to come rather than what was there at the present time. So we know, like I said, he was a wealthy man, but he never let that distract him. Abraham, he never let those things distract him. In fact, I always wonder how he carried all that stuff through the desert. But I mean, I guess that's where all those extra people came in. At some point, again, he had to be separated from Lot. Lot went his separate ways because there's just too many of them, and they're always fighting against each other. So there's a lot of people involved with that story. So interesting to see that even all that, he never let that distract him from the right things. So no matter what God blesses us with, we have to understand that the kingdom must come first and that these things remain second. And God allowed them to have these things in this life. He blesses us with all the things that we have. He never leaves us and forsakes us. And all these things will be left in this life after it's all over. And one of the examples that Corrie ten Boom, who knows who Corrie ten Boom is? Okay, she was a Calvinist. Her family were Calvinists, and they're in Holland. Um, their premise was, protecting the Jews. Well, they got arrested. They were sent to concentration camps. Her father died almost within a few days, and eventually her sister died. Basically, her whole world was stripped from her in a concentration camp. By some miracle, at the end of it, they let her go under unknown circumstances. So she became more, from that point forward, evangelistic. But one of the policies that she told people about in this life is hold on to what you have loosely because it can be taken from you. And that policy is a valid one. Hold on to what you have because it can be taken from you at any moment. Being kingdom minded will help you to understand that. Anything you have in this life can be taken from you if God wills it. And you're not going to take it into the next life. It's here to stay in this one. So I'll end with this. And this is a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, wrote this. And I think he ripped it off from the Bible personally. But, I mean, believe it or not, a lot of these guys did. So, you know, yeah, but they ripped a lot of their ideologies from the Bible. Even Socrates and a lot of these people ripped this stuff off from the Bible. Because you got to understand, it's been around a long time, even before them. So they say, hey, this is a good thought. I'll just re-engineer it into something that makes me look good. Well, this is one of those things, but you can get the idea out of it. So Lao Tzu wrote this. He says, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. That's why it's important to let go of these things in this world, hold on to them loosely, and focus on the kingdom. What's our destiny? Where are we going? Where do we want us to be? And when all this is said and done, where do we want to wake up when Christ calls us back to life? I mean, all of us assume, I think not everybody assumes we're going to be in the first resurrection. That is a goal, and that should keep you kingdom minded. Because one of my friends at the feast told me, they told me I'm going to be kings and priests. I don't really care for that. I just want to be there. That's all I want is I just want to be there. And I said, my friend, that's the right mentality you can have. That you just want to be there.
Wasn't it Paul that said he wanted to just do like a quarter stop or something in the kingdom? Who was that? Who said that? You know who it is. You're kidding. No.
That was like one guy was saying,
Someone said, no,
yeah.
I'm probably using the wrong terminology, but they said something that they want to just be humble. Some humble part in the kingdom. I know it's a scripture in there. I'll find it. I'll find it.
So going forward, next week we're going to discuss. We'll discuss ways that it impacts our lives and that, and there'll be more of an open discussion where you can input or talk about think about it yourself, ways that just kind of establish us as where we're going in our personal lives and that. I hope this was helpful. Um, I mean, looking at it, I could have added so much more.
Part one.
Yeah, and then I was thinking the third part would be looking at what the rewards of the kingdom are. Because it just doesn't say, well, you're going to be in the kingdom. He doesn't say that's where, okay, you're here, see you later. He says, this is what you're going to get if you get entered in the kingdom. This is what I promised you in the kingdom. We can look at those because that's what entices people. That's what looking afar off and saying, this is where I want to be. I don't want to be here. That's the incentives. He gave you incentives to be here, to be in the kingdom. So we'll look at those too. So I'll turn it over to our song guy and conclude services.